Hey everyone, before we get to this week's show, this is just your weekly reminder to please continue to pray for my wife, Lindsay. She is battling breast cancer right now, and we're praying for complete healing in Jesus' name. Thank you.
So you take those, all those numbers and you multiply them together and you get one in almost 83 million. It could be anybody other than Jesus. It's really hard to go anywhere else with it.
Wow.
The main question that everybody hoped would be answered is, how was the image made? You cannot recreate this image using any sort of known artistic or biological means. Can't be done. The stains map to both the face and the wounds on the back of the shroud in a pretty compelling, exact way. The Sudarium is the only other relic that has kind of transcended that realm of relics and become an object of scientific inquiry as well, regardless of what you believe. Well, regardless of religious convictions, you can study this as a scientist. The stuff that looks like blood, turns out it's actually blood, and it's human blood, and it's type AB. And that's the rarest blood type, but it is 3 times more common in Mediterranean Jews than it is in Europeans. When you look at the Sudarium and the stains on the Sudarium, those stains turn out to be made by human blood. That's type AB. So when you hear me talk about the shroud, I'm convinced it's Jesus, but I'm not 100% certain, but I'm next door to it.
Doug Powell, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I'm super glad to have you. And actually, I think you're having me because I
am having you.
Yes, I've traveled. In fact, this is the first time I stepped outside the studio to do a recording specifically for this show. And I reached out to you because I'm heavily interested in biblical archaeology. And I'm fascinated by it. And it's like a renewed fascination for me because my son, who is going to be turning 8 in December, is extremely fascinated by such things. And so it's kind of given us things to talk about on the way to school. And I started looking at the shroud, and then suddenly the shroud started popping up in news circles recently. And it just became like this obsession. I'm like, I got to find somebody to talk to. And you popped on my radar. And not only did you pop on my radar, you said, I have a life-size replica of the Shroud of Turin if you come to me. And I said, absolutely, here we are. So if you could, as we get into the topic of conversation, lay the groundwork as to who you are and why should people even consider listening to what you have to say about the shroud?
Well, I have a master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University, and I went through that program about 20 years ago, and one of the professors that I had was Gary Habermas, who is one of the experts in the historical evidence for the resurrection. And one day, I think he was going off script. He started talking about the shroud. And that was something that I have always been interested in, but I never did a super deep dive because I heard so many uncredible things about it that I thought, I don't even know really how to tell the good sources from the bad sources. And he turned out to be my guide into the good sources. And so I got far more interested in it as a result of that because I had some trustworthy sources to look into. And then from there, a few years ago, I wrote a novel that had to do with the shroud and another cloth that's associated with the shroud we'll probably talk about. And again, interviewed Habermas for a podcast that I did. And then that turned into talking to one of the members of the scientific team from 1978, who was part of the most, that team was the most intensive scientific study of the shroud ever done. And he was one of the photographers on the team. And he's the guy who took the picture of the shroud that we have here. This is a photograph printed on cotton that is a life-size photograph, 1-to-1 replica. So it's almost 15 feet long and 3 3/4 feet wide. And I got it from him. And then I discovered there was some postgraduate work that could be done on the shroud, and I went through that program, and he was one of my professors for that. So it became I became aware of it through the master's studies, and then it became more of a side interest, and then turned into another academic pursuit as a result of that.
And so you've spent a long time studying the shroud, and this you have to be fascinated by it. I mean, you don't study this kind of thing for so long without being fascinated by it.
Yeah.
Now, for people who maybe don't know anything about what we're about to get into, what is the Shroud of Turin, and how did it come into, I guess, relevance? It may be the right word. It's not just something that people found hidden away somewhere. This is something that's been passed around throughout the millennia. And what's the significance of this shroud?
Well, the belief is that this is the burial shroud of Jesus, and this is what was discovered in the tomb in the account of the discovery of the empty tomb in John 20. And it showed up, it first appears in Europe in about 1355, and it just seems to historically almost appear out of the blue. It's not explained where it came from or anything like that. The knight who showed it didn't explain it. He just presented it as the burial shroud of Jesus. And what fascinated people about it, what gave it a sense of believability, is when you're looking at the shroud, if this is the first time you've ever seen it, there is a vague figure of a man on it, both the front and back figure of a man, but the front and the back meet in the middle. So the front side is the left side as we've presented it, with the face here in the middle, and then the back side of the head starts in the middle and goes that way. So you can see the back side of a body outline and the front side of a body outline here. It looks like there's blood stains on both sides of it, and that's about as much as anybody knew. And that's about as much as you could know. Now, there's way more stuff, obviously, visually on the shroud than just that body, and that's because of all the different damages it's received over the years. And I can kind of walk you through what some of that is, and some of it becomes evidentially very important. But that's really all you could know about it, is that it is this mysterious burial shroud that just suddenly appears, and there's a body on it. And it was very famous. It was very well known. It was not without controversy. There were some naysayers around it. It wasn't like everybody instantly accepted it. And of course, then there's controversy throughout the Reformation about relics and their authenticity and things like that. And so this was part of that conversation as well. But in 1898, it was on display in Turin, Italy. So it's usually rolled up or was folded up or is not always on display. So they would have exhibitions every so often. And so it's not very common for it to be on display. It's actually pretty rare. But when it is, it's a big deal. What's that?
Is it still to this day? Or is it on display completely to this day?
It is not on display to this day. You can see the reliquary in a side chapel in the cathedral in Turin, the Cathedral of John the Baptist. But the reliquary, it's a high-tech reliquary that controls the light and the atmosphere and things like that. But it is covered in a cloth, so you cannot see it. You can see it. It looks like a big conference table almost. Okay. So it doesn't even appear like a traditional reliquary. So it just looks like a big, long conference table covered in what looks like, a cloth for an altar. So you can't go up and see it. You can go to it, but you can't actually see it. So when it's on display, it's a very big deal. But in 1898, it was on display, and at that time, the church thought, well, it would be nice to have some kind of commemorative card or something that people can get. And so for the very first time, they did an official photograph of the shroud. And the guy who took the photograph, Secundapia, was a local lawyer who had a camera and knew how to use it. And at that time, cameras were very expensive and photography was highly technical. So hardly anybody could afford to do it or knew how to do it. But he had one and had the know-how, and he was a supporter of the Shroud. And so this became very important because at the time, so everybody who remembers the era before digital phones. You know, you used to have in your camera, you had film in the back of it. You can't just like instantly take a photo. So when you have film in the back of the camera, when you take a picture of something, you have this light sensitive film in the back of the camera. And so whatever you take a picture of, whatever it is that's light turns dark on the film, and whatever is dark turns light on the film. So you have a light and dark reversal. So it's known as a negative. And that's what you take into a dark room, and then you would develop it, and then you would pass light through it, and it would flip light back around onto photographic paper. And that's how you got a picture, which was a big, long process. But the point is, what's in the back of the camera on the film is a light and dark negative. It's an exact reversal of the light and dark of what you see with the naked eye. So when Secundapia took this photograph, his camera was about the size of a refrigerator that you see in a motel or something, or a hotel. So it was this gigantic wooden box that with the front and back was connected by like an accordion, and that's how you focus this thing. And instead of film, it used glass plates that were about 20 inches square and covered with light-sensitive chemicals that weren't super light-sensitive. It required a long exposure to make an image. So they hired him to go take this photograph. And so after everybody who comes to see the Shroud for the day leaves, he gets in there at night. And it's in order to fit this into the frame of the camera, it's the camera had to be about 25 feet out in front of it and on top of a 10-foot tall platform. And then he had the problem of light because the cathedral didn't have any electricity at the time. So they had to bring in electric generators. And this became one of the first photographs ever taken with electric light. And to get enough light to make the picture, he did two different pictures. One was a 12-minute long exposure and one was a 20-minute long exposure. And then he takes the glass plates back to his darkroom. And when he developed them, it was completely counterintuitive because, I'll show you on the screen here, what he saw, the negative image of this image right here turns out to be the positive image of the body. So if, as you see on the screen over here, that, hold on a second, it is not there anymore. Okay. So you can see that the negative image on the Shroud, it shows a positive image of the man. So it's absolutely counterintuitive. And not only that, so he's totally startled by this, because this is the last thing you would expect to see. But not only that, but the Shroud itself, the man in the Shroud, is not only in a positive, but you can see all sorts of details that you can't see with the negative eye. So what it means is the image that you're looking at on the Shroud with the naked eye has the same properties as a negative image of a man. So the negative image of what we're looking at with our naked eye is the positive image of the man. None of it makes sense. But not only that, but when you look at it in negative, which is the positive of the body, you can see all sorts of details that you can't see otherwise. So he believed he was the first person to see the face of Jesus in almost 2,000 years. Wow. And this became a very famous image. So the Shroud, which was already famous, just got it ramped up into, a whole new level of fame because this was an extraordinary image here. But the most interesting thing about having an image like this is now people, scientists and medical professionals could study this body and in a way that you can't over here. So it was almost like you could do a forensic analysis of the body, or at least of the photograph of the body. And so at this moment, at the moment of the first photograph, the shroud moves outside of just being a relic, it becomes an object of scientific investigation. And so it's not merely a relic, it is an artifact. And this is one of the things that makes it unique, because there's only two relics that are actually artifacts. Because, if you think about any other relic that you know of, alleged piece of wood from the cross, or a bone of, one of the apostles or whatever, even if they're authentic, there's no way you could demonstrate it. There's no test you could do.
Right.
And this is what makes the shroud unique, and the other cloth that we're going to talk about as well, probably. So it starts the age of scientific investigation into the shroud in 1898, and what it shows is this negative image that shows the positive image of the man, shows that the body has been brutalized and tortured in all the same ways that you read about that happened to Jesus and the Gospels. And so you want me to walk you through the wounds?
Yes,
okay.
Because this is where it takes it from just an image of a man to actually pointing to a historical figure.
Right.
This is where you can say, oh, this was what Christ was buried in, and it's okay. There's a face there, fine. But how do we know? And then when you start taking all this information, it becomes, for me, undeniable.
Well, this is where it moves out of the realm of mere relic into an object of real scientific inquiry, and not just from believers, not from Christians, but from it can be there are a lot of people who have investigated the shroud that are not believers, and it's a totally legitimate object of inquiry for them, and it's one of the things that makes it so fascinating. So when you're looking at the positive image of the body now, we'll start at the back of the head here. So you can see that what appears to be blood with the naked eye on the shroud, it shows up as white on this negative image because it's dense and it's dark. And the thing that is in reverse is the body, not the actual blood. So the body is still the body is what gets reversed. The blood it appears white on this negative now. So if you look at the back of the head area, you can see there are a number of rivulets of blood that look like they come from small superficial wounds. And if you look at the front, you see the same sort of wounds over here. And this is what you would expect to find left from a crown of thorns, if the crown of thorns is not made like a wreath, but it's more the form of a helmet or a dome.
What we have
which
here.
is what we have right here. It would be something more like that, because it appears to be about 50 different wounds all over the head, front, back, and top.
So on that note, was there any historical evidence of anybody else receiving a crown of thorns?
No. This is a unique feature of Jesus's crucifixion. There were remember, he's being mocked for being the king of the Jews. And there were other people who were insurrectionists who were crucified, of course, but they weren't given a crown of thorns or mocked for being, a wannabe king or anything like that. This is totally unique to Jesus.
And so when we see the crown of thorns traditionally in our culture, it's always depicted as a wreath.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea where that depiction came from to what we have here as a replica, which looks more like a helmet?
I do not. If there's an explanation for that, I don't know what it is. I can spitball for you.
Sure.
Okay. So, and this may not be the case. Okay. So, a relic in Notre Dame in Paris of the crown of thorns exists there. And if you see it, it is more like a hoop. And most of the thorns are gone off of it, but that's what gets preserved. So if that really is, let's say it's authentic, it doesn't mean that's the whole of what was the crown of thorns. It may be parts of it. Okay, there's evidence just historically that thorns were broken off and sent off in different places in reliquaries. But let's say this really was an actual part of the crown of thorns. It doesn't mean it was merely this kind of wreath or halo type of shape, But in order to make the helmet, that is the base that holds the rest of the thorn branches that bend around it. So it may be that that's what is survived if it's
Gotcha.
authentic. There's no way to know. What
Yeah.
test are you going to do?
I think
Right?
that's it's something that, I mean, I've never even considered questioning, like, until I saw the replica. I was thinking, helmet, interesting, you know?
Yeah.
But it makes sense. I was talking to, I think I was talking to either my wife or my brother yesterday about this. And, you know, it's even more violent when you think about reef versus helmet, because they're abusing this man. And if you make this helmet, I imagine you can put a lot more pressure on it if by using a helmet, by hitting it onto the head or something like that, instead of just trying to push it down onto somebody's head. They weren't doing it gently. And so when you're talking about a man who went through a very violent death, like wearing a helmet of thorns, that it seems excruciatingly painful.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, some replicas have really long thorns as well. There's several different kind of species of plants that make thorns around that area. So we don't really know what kind. You know, these are pretty modest thorns I have on here. But when you're talking about your head, it doesn't take much.
No.
You know, your head bleeds so easily. And so it doesn't matter if it's a big thorn or a little thorn. As long as you got thorns, it's not pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack there.
No, it's not.
Curiosity.
No. Another thing you see is you can see the man in the shroud has long hair, and it's almost in the form of a ponytail. And we'll talk more about this later. We don't know if he wore it stylistically as a ponytail or it's just gathered together for a reason I'll explain later. There's evidence of abrasions on the shoulders, and this is consistent with where abrasions would be for somebody who carried the crossbeam of a cross to a place of crucifixion. Most of the times, a place of crucifixion would have the vertical beam already there, the stipes, and so the victim would be forced to carry the crossbeam, the patibulum. They wouldn't carry the whole cross. That would weigh almost 300 pounds or so. So you just physically couldn't do it. But they would be forced most of the time to carry the crossbeam. So that's the kind of wounds that would be left. You can see that the back is covered in these hash marks that you also see on the front. And this is consistent with wounds that would be left from a Roman scourge, but wouldn't be a scourge so scourges could have a couple different forms. So a scourge would be a wooden handle, and it would have thongs of leather coming off the end of it, 3 of them that are about 18 inches long. And then at the end of it, sometimes they had sharp things embedded in the end, like you see in Passion of the Christ. So it's, pieces of glass or metal or rock or whatever that would embed in the flesh of the victim and then strip away flesh. And it was very violent and brutal, and people died from scourging. But another way that a scourge could be made is with dull pieces at the end. So things like sheep bones or almost like lead sinkers at the end, and there'd be pairs of them or 3 of them at the end, and they would tenderize the skin and create these very deep contusions that would eventually break the surface. That's what you see are these barbell shapes all over. And so we have a Roman scourge replica over here with the lead weights at the bottom, which would be possibly what was used to make these marks. There's over 200 on the back, over 150 of them on the front, and you can't see the sides of the man. And these are the wounds that show up. So you got to figure with a weapon like that, there were marks made that didn't show up at first. So he's probably whipped more than 350 times to get those wounds. You can see the rear end of the man in the shroud is not flattened out under the body weight, which indicates that the body's in rigor mortis. So the muscles have stiffened up, which happens between 2 and 48 hours after death. And it just depends on environmental factors, but it shows that the man in the shroud is dead. If you go over to the front side, there is an apparent blood wound here between the 5th and 6th rib. See how the blood is, the way it's dripping out, and you can see it drip into the small of the back hair. it's not being pumped out. It's oozing out, which indicates the man in the shroud is dead. The heart's not beating. And if you look very closely right at that front angled tip there, that would be the wound. And you can see it close up over here. That is the size of a Roman spear tip, which we have a replica of right there, about 4 centimeters. And this, I'll come back to that in a minute. You can see that there's a wound on the wrist, which is right in the location that would support the body weight of a crucifixion victim. So the nail would go in at the top of the wrist, and that's where it has to be in order to support the body weight. If you put the nail in the palm, the body just slips right through it. So the nail would go through there. We have a replica nail right there. So you see a wound in the correct place for crucifixion. And you also see blood running down toward the elbow on the backside of the arms. So the arms are about in a 15 to 20 degree angle, which is the location of the arms in a crucifixion victim. Also, you cannot see the thumb at all because the nerve damage from the nail going through the wrist would cause the thumb to turn in, probably. So you can't see the thumb there. And then look how anatomically correct everything is, except the arms are too long. The arms are too long probably for a couple of reasons. First, the body is not laying flat. The man is in rigor mortis, so the knees are slightly bent and he's slightly rocked forward, still maintaining mostly the position of the cross, even though his arms have been moved in. So his arms would be moved down his body a little bit. But secondly, there is evidence in one of the shoulders that we can see that the shoulders are dislocated, which is what usually happens to a crucifixion victim, because they are laid out at the spot of crucifixion. They're laid out on the crossbeam, and they're nailed to the crossbeam, and then the crossbeam is lifted up, and it's slid into place onto the vertical one, and that jolts the shoulders probably to the point where they dislocate. Even if they don't dislocate at that point, they may dislocate while the victim is hanging there. And so what happens is the chest begins to crush the lungs, and the victim can't breathe. They're asphyxiating. And plus the mechanism of the physical mechanism of breathing, where the diaphragm is constricting in order to exhale, everything gets reversed. So at this point, the victim is asphyxiating and they cannot exhale. So the instinct is to pull up on the wrist in order to lift the weight off the chest, but they can't do it because their shoulders are dislocated. They don't have any leverage. Even if their shoulders aren't dislocated, I mean, think about how hard that is. You can only do that for a few times. And so the victim's going to die less than 15 minutes from asphyxiation. So the only thing they would have to give themselves leverage to lift the weight off of the lungs is when the nail is going through the feet. And so they press up on the nail, and then they are able to exhale and then get a breath and come back down again. And so the cycle begins, and you can see that there is blood on both the front and back of the feet that is in the spot of where a nail would be.
Wow. What are the, because I was always told that, I don't want to say I heard somewhere that most crucifixion victims were tied to the cross and not nailed. Is there statistical odds of this being even more so Christ being nailed to a cross versus being tied to the cross? Or was it always something that people were nailed to the cross?
There's no manual for how to do these things. So there's variety. There's variety in how the cross was formed. Some are capital T's, some are lowercase t's, some are X's, some are just, there's no T at all. They're crucified on a pole. Some are crucified on a tree. There's all sorts of ways it can be done. So there's no set standard way to do it necessarily. However, you're right. There were a couple different ways ropes were used. Sometimes nails weren't used at all. They were only ropes, because if you think about it, the nails through your wrists or your feet, that doesn't kill you. Being put in that position, you are in a position where you're slowly asphyxiating, and all sorts of other factors start to come into play as well that we'll talk about in a minute. Sometimes there were nails used and ropes at the same time because there was so much pressure put on the nails by the body that the wrist would pop off the nail heads. The body would flop forward. And so sometimes ropes were used just to fortify the arms to the nails. So it's a yes, no, and both.
Wow. I mean, the way we're talking about this crucifixion, I mean, if anybody has seen The Passion of the Christ, they can visually see it. But maybe anybody who maybe hasn't seen it, it was made, 20 years ago. This really kind of paints a picture of how violent this crucifixion process was. I mean, I had never heard anybody talk about the shoulders being dislocated during the process. And, as a sports fan, you see players have a dislocated shoulder and you're just like, oh, that looks painful. Try having both of them while they're trying to kill you. I mean, it's such a painful process that I think growing up, you have this almost like censored version of it where it's just like, we knew he was tied to or nailed to the cross, but it was just, tap, tap, nail him to the cross, and he hung there and probably starved to death or something. Like, it wasn't like this violent thing until you start really looking into the details of it. And the shroud not only backs it up, but visually gives you that depiction of what is documented as to what happened to him.
Yeah, it makes it much more concrete.
Yeah, absolutely.
It puts the horror back into it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have all these markings, the lashes on the body, the blood marks. What else? What other things about this would you like to go into? As far as I know, you talk about the statistical odds of these wounds being on this body versus maybe other crucifixions and stuff, but I find that very interesting because
you want to know the odds?
I do.
All right, let's do the odds. So the odds come from several people have run the odds here. And of course, these are estimates that are done, and the way the odds get run are several features. Specific features of the shroud are assigned statistical probabilities, and then you multiply them all together, and that's how you get the odds. So I believe the oldest ones come from that professor I had, Gary Habermas, who co-wrote a book with the communications director for that group of scientists I mentioned, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or also called the STURP team. They have 2 books together, and so they calculated the odds because, a lot of people got crucified. So what are the odds that this is Jesus if so many people were crucified in the ancient world? So to answer that, they chose these 7 different features and gave them probabilities, which they then made even more conservative. So these are incredibly conservative numbers in their view. So they, for example, they show the crown of thorns. They give that a 1 in 400, considering that's the only person we know of crucified with the crown of thorns. That's pretty conservative. They show that the shroud has no evidence of decomposition, so they're looking for liquefaction, putrefaction coming out of the mucous membrane in the nose and the mouth. That hasn't happened. There's no evidence of that. They give that a 1 in 10. The spear wound in the side, they give 1 in 27. Remember, that was done by a Roman soldier in order to see if Jesus was dead or not. Well, he didn't have to use a sword, and he didn't have to do it in that spot, or he didn't have to use a spear. So, he could have done a test in a bunch of different ways, but this is how he does it. They give it a 1 in 27. We just talked about ropes or not on the crucifixion. So some people, again, were crucified without nails, and some had ropes and nails. There is neither on the man in the shroud, and you don't read about either in the Gospels. They give that a 1 in 2. Scourge marks, they give 1 and 2. Almost everybody who was condemned to crucifixion was scourged beforehand. The reason being it weakened the victim significantly because, like I said, people died during scourging. So you had blood loss and shock and all sorts of things that you're suffering from as a result of scourging. But that weakened a victim when they were put on to the cross. So if a crucifixion victim was not scourged beforehand and they were well hydrated and well nourished and in good health, they could last upwards of a week.
Wow.
It took that long to die for some people. And so the scourging, as brutal as it was, and it was brutal, in a way, it lessened the time on the cross. I mean, not in a way, that's what it was designed to do. In Jesus's case, the scourging that Pilate gives him is to get him out of the crucifixion. Remember, he's not condemned. He's not scourged because he's condemned to the cross. He's scourged to keep him off the cross. And yet the crowd still wants him crucified. So he ends up having both anyway. So more people were scourged before they were crucified than not. So they give that a 1 and 2. That's why that one is conservative. No broken legs on the man in the shroud or in the gospel accounts. The idea here is that if a Roman soldier wanted to hasten the execution of someone, they would break their shins so they couldn't raise themselves off the, they could breathe and they would die within a few minutes. And we read that happening to the 2 other people crucified with Jesus, but not with Jesus. So 1 and 3. And then the most conservative number is the buried in a linen shroud, which they give 1 and 8. The reason why that's the most conservative is because when people were crucified during the time of insurrection, they were just left on the cross to rot as a warning to not challenge Rome. And when during peacetime, the crucifixion victims were almost never given back to the family. Instead, they were thrown into a shallow common grave, and they were just erased from history, essentially. However, there were times when the bodies were given back, but it was very rare. So think about it this way. Crucifixion was a punishment for about 1,000 years. About 750 years of that were the Romans did it. And during that 1,000-year period, there's an estimated 2 billion people who lived. So half of them are men. And just the best guess anybody's got is that about 1 in 100 people, 1 in 100 men were crucified.
Oh.
So there were a lot of crucifixion victims. And yet, archaeologically, there are only 4 remains of crucifixion victims that have ever been found. Only 2 are from the 1st century, and only 1 is from the area around Jerusalem. So the bodies were rarely given back, although it did happen because we've got evidence of one. And in fact, the heel bone of that victim with the nail going through it, we have a museum quality replica right there. That's the thing at the end there. So it did happen. But it was far less common than 1 in 8, which is what they've assigned it. And the thing is, you can't bury a body in the linen shroud unless you get the body back, and people very rarely got the body back. So you take those all those numbers and you multiply them together, and you get 1 in almost 83 million. It could be anybody other than Jesus. The other number I'll show you comes from Bruno Barbaras. He's a mathematical physicist who is an expert in the Shroud of Turin. And he ran some of the same features. He gives crown of thorns 1 in 5,000, no decomposition 1 in 500. He includes the feature that the victim carried the cross. He gives that 1 in 2. Not everybody was in good enough shape to carry the cross beam at that point. The spear wound, he gives 1 in 10. He's more conservative. He has hasty burial on here. So the condition of the body of this, what appears to be a Jewish man, is not, it's not totally in conformity with the Jewish burial customs of the first century. So it looks like it's partially done so that maybe somebody's going to come back later and do it for whatever reason. So it looks like a partial burial, that they're not quite done. In his view, he gives that a 1 in 20. Crucified with nails, that's the same thing as without ropes. And then he gives the linen shroud 1 in 100. With those numbers, you get 1 in 200 billion that it could be anybody other than Jesus, which is a statistical certainty.
Yeah.
So for whatever that's worth.
According to his numbers, it's like impossible to it not being Christ.
Right. Now you're in OJ's glove, blood, DNA territory there.
Yeah.
It's really hard to plausibly go anywhere else with it.
Wow. That's incredible. So, and he was a mathematician.
He's a mathematical physicist.
Mathematical physicist. Job, and he was a believer in the shroud.
He is a believer in he's still alive. He was one of my professors as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. And so it's actually his numbers are a lot less conservative. Well, let's say he's overestimating it. I'm not saying that, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say he's overestimating it by a factor of 10. Yeah.
Well, that just lessens it to 1 in 20 billion. Let's say he overestimates it by 100. Now it's 1 in 2 billion, right?
Yeah.
So it's if these numbers are anywhere close to representative of the actual odds, then it's pretty compelling.
Wow, that's incredible. So I come out here to talk to you about the shroud, and you introduced me to a whole other piece of the puzzle. This piece of fabric that I had heard whispers of, but I had no idea I was going to get a chance to look at today. That actually complements the shroud, and in my mind, doubles down the authenticity of the shroud. And I feel like we got to talk about that, because if we're here trying to show people why the shroud is what tradition and history says it is, I think this other cloth holds a huge key to that.
Okay, so what do you know about the other cloth? Where have you heard about the other cloth?
You. So essentially, it's been you. I mean, I've heard. I'm drawing a blank of what it's called again. What is it called?
The Sudarium of Oviedo.
Of Oviedo.
Yeah, which sounds like it's like out of Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess the only thing that I've ever heard of it would be out of scripture, but historically and stuff, I don't recall hearing people talk about it a whole lot.
So in scripture, we read about a face cloth that was found at the same time as the burial cloth in John 20. So when Peter and John go into the tomb, they find the burial clothes, and then they find the face cloth laying to the side. And you see that in John 20, 5-7. That's the account of it. And where we see face cloth in English, the Greek word is sudarion, and that's a loan word from Latin, which means sudarium. And a sudarium is just a sweat cloth. That's what the word means. And in the first century Roman Empire, most of it was really hot and really dirty, and it was just something you carried around to kind of keep yourself clean. It's almost like, a football quarterback with their, they're wiping their hands on their towel, right? Yeah. That's stuck into their uniform. It's kind of like that. You can imagine. It's about the size of a pillowcase. It is just kind of a low quality piece of linen, and this face cloth is believed to have been wrapped around the head of Jesus when he died on the cross. And there is a city in Spain, in northern Spain, called Oviedo. It's about 200,000 people, and the cathedral there believes they have the sudarium that was wrapped around Jesus's head when he died on the cross. And so we have a replica of that as well. And there is no image on it like there is on the shroud, but there are a bunch of stains on it. And the stains, once you kind of familiarize yourself with them, they match what you see on the shroud. It's pretty fascinating. The stains map to both the face and the wounds on the back of the shroud in a pretty compelling, exact way. So the sudarium it is the only other relic that has kind of transcended that realm of relics and become an object of scientific inquiry as well, regardless of what you believe. Well, regardless of religious convictions, you can study this as a scientist. And one of the things that has been discovered is that, well, okay, in the 1978 investigation of the Shroud, the stuff that looks like blood on the Shroud, okay, this is one of the things they had to figure out. Is it really blood? Turns out it's actually blood, and it's human blood, and it's type AB. And that's the rarest blood type, but it is 3 times more common in Mediterranean Jews than it is in Europeans. So it's also post-mortem blood, which they can tell because under UV light, they can see that the serum is separated from the red blood cells. So they know it's post-mortem blood. And they also know that the blood coming out of the side wound here is it's a mixture of blood with pulmonary edema, 6 parts pulmonary edema and 1 part blood. That's the fluid that builds up in the lungs during asphyxiation. And so that corresponds with what a crucifixion victim is suffering. And when you look at the Sudarium and the stains on the Sudarium, those stains turn out to be made by human blood. That's type AB, and is postmortem blood, and is 6 parts pulmonary edema and 1 part blood, with the exception of what appears to be where it touched the back of the head, and in that case, it's lifeblood. So it was actually blood that was shed while the victim was still alive.
That's incredible. And so this behind me gives us a direct link to the Shroud.
It seems to, yes.
Okay, so am I taking a liberty of saying that?
Well, there's compelling evidence for the authenticity of both of these things, but there's not dead certain proof.
Sure.
There's always going to be wiggle room.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you hear me talk about the Shroud, I'm convinced it's Jesus, but I'm not 100% certain, but I'm next door to it. But if it turns out to not be, nothing in my theology is, hurt or destroyed or anything like that. Okay. My faith doesn't depend on whether this is real, but I only refer to this as the man on the Shroud because we don't know.
Right.
But the more that you learn about it, the more compelling it is that it's Jesus. But I don't want to overstate the case because, as you can tell, both you and I are fascinated by this thing.
Very fascinated.
And there's so much evidence, and it's so exciting to learn this credible evidence that you get tempted to overstate the case.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do. And I don't want to be one of them. Okay. Because I think the most powerful case for the Shroud and the Sudarium is the most modest case, because the most modest case is still so compelling that you don't have to overstate it. If you undersell it and you still get that degree of compelling evidence, then that's where I want to go with this.
I mean, so the odds of AB blood type being on both cloths alone brings it down to such a narrow margin, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't even know what the odds are, but I think it's 10% or less of people in the world have a type AB. So, rarest is not like ultra rare, but when you start to think, well, these 2 claws, what are the odds of that? The first thing that the skeptics of the Shroud will often try to come up with some method of being able to recreate it. And there are accounts in the Middle Ages and during the Reformation where there are even claims that this was painted. The image of the body was painted. So in 1978, the STIRP team investigation, they had over 24 different tests that they did. Like I said, it was the most rigorous scientific investigation ever done on the shroud. And it's where we have most of our information still to this day. But the main question that everybody hoped would be answered is, how was the image made? And the answer they came up with was, we have no idea. They don't know. But they do know conclusively what didn't make it. And it's not paint, stain, dye, any sort of chemicals, no scorching. You cannot recreate this image using any sort of known artistic or biological means. Can't be done. The image can't be made that way. But the reason why I bring this up is because we were talking about the blood. So one of the things that people have said is that, well, there's trace elements of medieval paint on the blood, on the shroud. And so we know that, there's paint on the shroud. And so skeptics to this day say that. And that is absolutely true. There are trace elements of iron oxide, which was an ingredient in medieval paint, on the blood of the shroud. But what the skeptics don't tell you is that there are also trace elements of paint where the image of the body is, but there's no blood. And there's trace elements of paint where there's no blood and no body. It's kind of uniformly found, but there's so little of it, you might be able to recreate one blood drop using, the amount of trace elements of paint that they have found. And so there are a couple of ways of thinking through this claim of the paint on there. The main one is that when the shroud became well known in Europe, the owners allowed replicas to be made of the shroud that were painted, that were then laid directly face to face onto the shroud as a way of blessing or sanctifying them. And it's probably contamination from that. Because the way the image exists on the shroud is nothing was deposited into the cloth in order to make the shroud. Okay, so if you were going to paint or stain it or use any sort of pigment or any sort of dye or chemical or oils or whatever, you're adding to the cloth. And that means if you took the shroud and you backlit it, you would be able to still see the outline of the body because it's deposits on the cloth that are creating the image. But if you do that, the only thing that shows up are the blood stains. You don't ever see the body. Because what the STIRP team discovered is that not only is none of that stuff present, that what is creating the image on the physical properties of the image on the shroud is that it's a degradation of the linen. And that it only is a degradation in the outermost fibrils of the linen thread. So the linen thread is it's not just one thing. A thread is 200 or 300 microfibrils of material kind of spun together, and what they discovered is that the image is only present on the outermost fibrils of the thread, and they don't penetrate at all. Paint, stain, pigment, dye, oils, they will all penetrate and be absorbed into the material, into the thread. Doesn't happen on the shroud. And so if you look at the screen, what I've got is, in order to understand just how superficial the image is, a human hair is about 60 microns in diameter. A linen fibril on the shroud is 10 to 15 fibrils, so a quarter of that size. And the image penetrates 0.2 microns. Okay, so that's actually, I've got that size on the screen. It looks like a pixel's out. Okay, you probably can't even see it on camera. It's that small. That's how far it penetrates. And what's fascinating about it is that on the shroud, the image that we're looking at of the body, if you look at the backside of the image and you went around to the backside of the actual shroud, the body isn't there. Okay, it's only on this side of the material. As far as the front side of the body goes, if you look at the backside of the shroud, the face area does come through a little bit, and also one of the hands does. So there is a double image on it on the front side, but not on the back side. But there's no change to the cloth in the middle of the cloth.
Wow.
It doesn't penetrate. It's on the superficial parts of both sides of the face and the hands, but not in the middle. So it doesn't absorb all the way through. Okay, you can't recreate it. That's the thing. So, and think about this. Let's say you did paint if you were going to fake the shroud, what you would do, at least intuitively, you would paint the body and then you would paint the blood in place on the body so it's in an accurate position. But the body doesn't appear beneath the blood stains. There is no change under the blood stains because the blood stains get deposited onto the cloth first. So whatever makes the image of the body happens after the blood is on there. And that means if you were going to fake it, you have to start by painting the blood streaks and then painting the body around it, which again doesn't make any sense.
None.
So the other thing about the body they discovered is that it has three-dimensional properties to it. There's information, three-dimensional information in the image of the body, and in the way that there's only one color that makes up the image of the body, and the reason why it looks darker in some places is because it gets more concentrated in that area, the damage to the linen, and the darker the image is, it's also more defined. It shows the body in a more defined way, and that indicates how close the cloth was to the body. So the darker the image is, the closer it was to the body, and that is true up to about 4 centimeters. You know, the body isn't wrapped around it like a wetsuit or anything. It's going to drape away from the different contours of the body. So there's parts of it, parts of the body that show on the shroud where it's not touching the shroud. It's within like 4 centimeters, and it gets fainter as it gets further away. And this is something that's not true of photographs, and it's not true of paintings. They don't work like that. So you could take the density variance that you see in the body of the shroud and put it into an image modeler, and it will create a 3-dimensional image based on that data. And it's linear data. So it's not from contact with the body. The whatever imprints the image onto the shroud is coming straight off one direction. It's not explaining it well. Imagine if you were going to try to recreate this. You could take a body and you could put paint or pigment on it and then put cloth on it. And as the cloth fits around the body, it's going to imprint the image of the body onto the cloth. And it's going to look exactly like the body, only as long as the cloth retains the contours of the body. But as soon as it flattens out, it's distorted. And the image on the cloth is not distorted. So the image on the shroud was not made by contact with the body.
Wow. That provides a whole new mystery.
Yeah.
That provides a whole new mystery.
Right.
And I don't know if we want to get there right now or if we should hold off, because that's something that takes my brain down a rabbit hole.
Oh yeah.
Everything you're saying, you're laying out evidences as to why this is what tradition says it is. And you brought up the skeptics, and you brought up the idea of the paint. Is that their strongest argument against the shroud, would you say? Or are there more?
That would be no, it's not. That's one of them.
Okay.
But that's been, you can show that there's evidence, there's a more plausible explanation than what they're saying because of all the features of the image. Probably the strongest one they lean on is the radiocarbon dating.
Okay.
Really? We can talk
That's
about
the one
that.
they lean on?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Because that was the big monkey wrench in shroud studies is when that comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So we can go any number of directions at this point. So if you want to talk a little bit more about the Sudarium and the correspondence,
I feel like we should, because
I
think I could easily move past that by accident. So,
okay,
because I know there's parts of the Sudarium that you have an overlay that I want to get to, because I think when you showed it to me, I thought it was really fascinating. And if we could maybe go into more of the details of the Sudarium before we move off of that.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's see. I will. Let's move to the screen.
Okay.
And
sounds good.
I'll have my. I'll kind of show you what we're looking at here. So, this is the Sudarium. Like I said, it's about the size of a bed sheet. There's no image on it, but you can see there's kind of three general areas. We've got this area right here. We've got this area, and then this area, which strangely looks like the middle area reflected. And the way to understand these stains is that this right here is what was in direct contact with a face. And this, you can see that this right here, well, I'll show you more details in a minute, but this right here is you can see the nostrils of a nose. If you look closely and you know what you're looking for, you can see the nostrils of a nose. And then this would be like the upper lip, the lower lip, and you can see this kind of hook shape in the stain. That's where the blood is dripping into the beard and around the chin. And you got another kind of a hook claw shape going this direction. This vertical area is following the bridge of the nose, and then blood pools on the forehead. I'll explain that in a minute. And then you can see there are other like isolated stains, like this one. This is a hole in it that is the shape of a stain, which is intriguing. I'll show you that in a minute. And then you've got a bunch of wounds in the on this side, and then this big butterfly shape right here. So, because of these odd shapes and these isolated shapes and these defined features from the face, you've got enough data to see if it can match the face on the shroud. Now, the researchers into the Sudarium have been able to recreate this whole stain by placing the body into three different positions. So this is about how the shroud gets the Sudarium gets registered onto the face. And you can see how the blood seems to cluster around the nose, because this is where the blood starts coming out of the nose and the mouth right here. Let me pause and explain why there's a Sudarium in the first place.
Yes.
Because, I mean, the idea of a picture of Jesus with this cloth wrapped around his head is really freaky to picture. It's like a kidnap victim or something like that. The idea is that in Leviticus 17:11, it says that the life is in the blood. So the Jews have historically believed that the soul is in the blood. The soul's in the lifeblood. And so in the first century Orthodox Jews, when their burial customs said that when a Jew died violently, meaning that they bled, they have to bury the blood with the body, because that's what has the soul. You got to keep the soul with the body. So if there was blood on the clothes, they would bury the clothes with the body. If there was blood on the dirt, they would collect the dirt as much as they could, and they'd bury it with the body. So with a Jewish man on the cross, if this really was Jesus, the reason why he's got a cloth around his face is because he's now spewing blood toward the end of the crucifixion process. And as he's dying, they know all that blood is collected in the lungs. And as soon as they start moving him off the cross, it's going to come gushing out the nose and the mouth. And so they have to collect it. And that's the idea behind the Sudarium, that this is what its function was. So
this is something that was put on Jesus literally during his crucifixion.
Well, it would be when he appeared to be dead.
Okay, so but it wasn't something that like they bury him, they put him in the tomb, and then they wrap his head in it.
No.
This is something that happened while he was on the cross.
He was still on the cross. He appeared to be dead.
Wow. Okay.
Now, the blood on the backside right here is lifeblood. So he's either that's seeping out before the serum separates from the red blood cells. And so it doesn't appear to be, it's not post-mortem blood, but I mean, he's dead at this point. That's when they put it on. Excuse me. So the body is on the cross when it gets put on, but apparently his head was rocked forward into the side like this, and so they can't wrap it all the way around. So it gets doubled back, which is why you have a mirror image of the stain. That's what makes this. This is not contact. This is in contact. This is folded onto the area that was in contact. So the body's in this position for 45 minutes to an hour. And then the body was laid face down with the feet slightly elevated, and that resting on the forehead, and the head to be slightly cocked so the blood runs down the bridge of the nose and pools on the forehead. And then it's in that position for 45 minutes to an hour. So those total, that gives a plausible window of time for Joseph of Arimathea to go get permission to get the body to bury Jesus. Then the body's in one more position, which is face up, for about 5 minutes. And the distance between Golgotha and the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre is less than 50 yards. So 5 minutes isn't anything to move the body. And there's evidence of a hand reaching over the back of the head to pinch the cloth over the nose that you see on the Sudarium. And so the question is, how close of a match is it to the shroud? So I've done some work on this. If you look at the main stain of the Sudarium, I've made these outlines of the general area. So you got the main outline here, and then the more condensed outline here. The nose is outlined right here with the upper lip, lower lip. You can also see there's an isolated stain right on the eyebrow. There's a hole right here that looks like it's stain-shaped and might have been cut out to give as like a relic to someone important.
Wow.
And then you've got, but we don't know that.
Sure,
okay?
but I mean, it's a logical theory.
Yeah. And then you've got a stain right here on the forehead. And if you map that onto the shroud, you can see that once you register the nose, this stain from the Sudarium matches a stain right below this epsilon blood streak right here pretty closely. And this hole in the Sudarium matches almost exactly this stain right here. This cluster of stains on the shroud matches the big stain. And then the edge of the forehead stain runs right along the epsilon-shaped streak of blood on the shroud, and you can see this follows the beard, and it matches pretty exactly. It's a little messy to look at like that, so I created another version where you can see kind of the mask, how it fits like that. And I have a way for you to do it yourself if you want to do it.
I would love to.
All right.
I would love to.
So what we have here, I've got an overlay that you can see that. Here's the nose of the shroud. So if we register the nose to the nose, and this dot, that blood stain to that, or to this blood stain right below the 3. Okay, here's the nose on the shroud. And we register that dot, look at what happens.
Wow.
Everything fits exactly. Okay, it doesn't have to be resized or anything. It fits about as exact as you can expect. Okay, it's never going to be 100% because remember, this is the shroud would have been on a body that is laying there. It's not moving, whereas the Sudarium was wrapped around a head that's in 3 different positions and is getting moved.
Right.
And was actually rewrapped because it's only doubled back in that first position. So after they get him onto the ground, they wrap it all the way around. They do a little bit of a rewrap. So it's never going to be 100% match, but it's a pretty compelling match.
Oh, it's incredibly compelling. for me, it seals the deal. So I think it's a wild match, and it's something that just really puts into perspective as to the complexities of the two being paired together. And you can say, oh, are you reaching? Are you trying to, just pull this out of thin air? This is absolutely a complex analyzation of these two pieces of material that seem to match incredibly close.
It's pretty compelling, but that's not all, because there's the backside. That's just the face. So if you go to the backside, so this is what it looks like if you map it out to a sculpture that is a very accurate recreation of the body on the shroud, a 3-dimensional recreation. But on the backside, if you outline the little wounds that you see and also the big butterfly shape, and you compare it to the backside of the head, it's another pretty compelling match, because you have the same sort of stains over here, but then this shape right here, I don't know how well you can see it, but this funnel shape is the long hair. Wow. So if the man in the shroud had, if he wore his hair stylistically as a ponytail, then it would have been the anchor that they could pin the Sudarium in, and that's where they start the wrap. Okay. If he didn't wear a ponytail, then they would have gathered his hair together and they run the pins in. Either way, but once you get this blood, this blood clot in this ponytail, that will hold the hair together even after the Sudarium's removed, which is why you would still have this kind of funnel shape of hair on the back of the shroud. If you do the overlay, it looks like that. You can see how the blood stain fits right into the funnel shape of the hair, and how those wounds in the back of the head are so similar.
Yeah, that's wild. That's absolutely wild. And so you were showing me earlier, I believe it was on a map, the route that these two relics took over the years, and I think you were mentioning how there was other tests that were done to this. I believe it was with pollen.
Yeah,
that kind of points to a very specific area.
Yes. Okay. So if you would, there's two ways to go about this, because the pollen is a scientific corroboration of the documentary evidence, the historical evidence in both cases, and vice versa. The historical evidence ends up matching what you find in the pollen. It's a really cool double line of evidence here. So the idea is, which one do you want to do first? I'll do the shroud first. Okay.
Ahead. Yeah.
So the question is, with all this scientific evidence, the question is, well, if it, everything seems to point to its authenticity. If it really did exist prior to showing up in Europe in 1355. Where was it? I mean, the guy never said where he got it from or anything like that. So where was it? Is there any evidence for it in history? And it turns out that there is. And so if we document it, the oldest evidence for it comes from the church historian Eusebius, who was the bishop of Caesarea. He was at the first council, first ecumenical council. He was Constantine's biographer. About 324, he writes the most important early history of the church. And he includes things like, where we get the books of the New Testament and some of the books that get left out and why, and what happened to the apostles. And he includes a lot of different stories and traditions that he is copying from earlier documents that he quotes extensively and preserves them once they're lost to history, which is one of the reasons why he's important. And one of the stories he tells is about the king of Edessa named Abgar. Now, when I tell you the story of the early days of the shroud up until it hits Constantinople, there is a general thread for the story, but there are different traditions and sometimes contradictions to it, but and I'll point out what they are, but I'm going to tell you the general story, and then I'm going to show you where it kind of splits apart.
Okay.
But you'll see that there is one consistent narrative that's pretty fascinating. So Eusebius tells this story about the king of Edessa, Abgar, and that he lived at the time of Jesus, and that he suffered from some kind of disease, and we think it was probably leprosy and or really bad arthritis. So he sends a messenger to get Jesus to come back to Edessa and heal him. And Edessa is a city in Turkey right along the Syrian border. These days it's called Urfa or Sanli Urfa. So the messenger shows up and Jesus says he can't go. But according to Eusebius, Jesus writes a letter to give to the messenger, to give to Abgar, that says he can't come, but he will send somebody. And then shortly afterwards, Jesus is crucified. And after his resurrection, the Apostle Thomas gives the burial shroud to the disciple Thaddeus. So in Luke 10, I believe, there's the 70 disciples who get sent out by Jesus. And one of them traditionally is Thaddeus. And in Syrian, his name is Adai. So Thaddeus / Adai takes the burial shroud, goes to Edessa. He appears before Abgar and he puts it on top of Abgar. He drapes it on him, and Abgar is healed and becomes a Christian. And so Abgar takes it and he mounts it, or he wraps it up or folds it and puts it kind of in a box, maybe with a window cut out so you could see the face. Unsure about that, but he puts it in a niche above the city gate, which is where there was a pagan idol, and you were supposed to pay tribute to the pagan idol when you went into the city. And so he had that taken down, and he had the image put there. And then when he died, his son was a Christian, and he left it there. And then when he died, either his son or Abgar's grandson came to power and reverted to paganism. And so the bishop at the end of the first century thought that the image might get destroyed. And so he hid it by bricking it up in the niche. And people remembered that there was this cloth with the face on it, but they didn't know where it was. And that's where it stayed for 400 years. And in the year 544, the Persians came and they laid siege to the city of Edessa. And during the siege, the bishop of Edessa received a vision, and the vision told him to go get the image out of the wall and told him where to go get it. And so he opens up the wall in that spot, and there's the image. And then he parades it around the city to bring protection to the city. And he got to a certain spot in it, and a bunch of copper pots were hanging there, and they started rattling. And this is how the people of Edessa discovered that the Persians were digging a tunnel underneath the city so they could come up in the middle of the city. So the people of Edessa dug a hole down to the tunnel, and they poured in a bunch of oil and set it on fire and burned the Persians. And this is how they break the siege. And so the image of Edessa becomes very, very famous. And okay, so let me pause.
Okay.
That whole story is not in Eusebius. Eusebius doesn't mention an image or anything like that. He mentions the letter. He mentions Abgar. There is another history, or there's a book called The Doctrine of Adai from the late 4th century that says that the messenger from Abgar was a painter, and he paints Jesus's image, and that's what gets taken back. There's another tradition that says Jesus, while he was talking to the messenger, takes a cloth and he wipes his face, and it imprints his image on it, and that's what the messenger takes back. So there are a couple different threads there about what's happening. In the year 590, I believe, you have the history of this siege with the Persians, and that's where it talks about an image that's called an archapoieta, or an image not made by human hands. And so you can, there's always some image, almost not in Eusebius, but otherwise all the traditions always mention an image, and it always goes to Abgar, and it's always in Edessa. There's no competing tradition for it. There's some evidence that some scholars believe it may have gone through Antioch on the way to Edessa, but it's always Edessa, it's always Abgar, and there's almost always an image. There is another tradition that says that there was a flood that damaged the city walls to Edessa in about the year 525, and that's how the image gets rediscovered. But it's still paraded around the city in 544, and that's still how they break the siege. So you can see the common thread that gets you this far, even though there's variations and sometimes contradictions in the details of it. So now we're in 544. Image of Edessa is very, very famous. So it's known as the image of Edessa or the Mandylion. Sometimes we think of the Mandylion as only a cloth with the face on it. And the reason is probably because of how it was presented, which is in a box with only the face showing. So nobody knew there was a whole body there. But it stayed in Edessa for another 400 years. And then the Emperor Romanus in 943 brings it to Constantinople because that's the seat of the empire. That's the seat of Christianity. That's where all the relics are being taken. And it's just like relic central in Constantinople. So it gets taken there and it arrives in 944. And it stays there for 250 years. And in the year 1203, there was a crusader during the Fourth Crusades who goes around to the different palaces and churches and kind of makes a diary, a travelogue of all the different relics he's seen. And he goes to this certain church called My Lady St. Mary of Blasharne, and he says that there he sees the burial shroud of Jesus that was raised up, made to stand up every Friday. And which is kind of an interesting way of describing it. It doesn't sound like it's just a sheet with a face on it. It sounds like a whole body. And one of the things that the Stirp team discovered is that linen retains a memory of its fold really well, however it's been folded. And they discovered that one of the ways it has been folded in its history is around a mechanism that allows it to be raised and lowered out of a chest. And this may be what this guy saw. And then a few months later, in April 1204, is the sack of Constantinople, where the Western Church sacks and attacks the Eastern Church in Constantinople instead of going around to Jerusalem, which is what they were supposed to do in the Fourth Crusades. Instead, they just stop and they loot and destroy a bunch of Orthodox riches and take them back to Europe. And this is where the letter of Jesus had been taken, and it's said to have been destroyed at this time. To be very clear, I don't believe the letter of Jesus ever existed. I think this is an apocryphal part of the story because I think if Jesus, there's only one thing we know that Jesus actually wrote, and that's when he writes in the dirt during the story of the woman caught in adultery. And even that probably isn't original to Scripture, even though it's probably an authentic happening of Jesus. So if Jesus ever wrote anything, we would absolutely have a copy of it. And if he only ever wrote one thing in his entire life, it probably wasn't a note that says, sorry, I can't come right now. So I don't think this is
I mean, like if we consider just the supernatural preservation of Scripture, like you would think Jesus and what he wrote would be something that God would ordain to be preserved.
Yeah.
Right.
So, for you and I, we see, we factor in God's providence and how he preserves and transmits Scripture. So for skeptics, they need other sorts of evidence. Right. So at this point, during the sack of Constantinople, it disappears for like 150 years. And then it shows up in 1355 in Léry, France. When it shows up in Léry, France, it's displayed by a knight named Geoffrey de Charny. And he doesn't ever explain where it came from or anything like that. But it doesn't mean there's no evidence. There's very little evidence, but the evidence that we have does seem to tell a very plausible story. And then there's a whole speculative line of where the shroud may have been. And it's super fascinating, but there's no evidence for it. And yet you could see how it still might play into the story as well. So what we know is that the year after the sack of Constantinople in 1205, the king of Thessaly, so the northern part of Greece, wrote a letter to Pope Innocent III, and said that during the sack of Constantinople, all sorts of relics get looted, and they were taken back to France or Venice, and one of the things that went missing is the burial shroud of Jesus. And that has turned up in Athens. So 1205, we've got this letter to the Pope, says the burial shroud's in Athens. What makes this interesting is the king of Athens was from France, from Byzantine France, and his name is Othon de la Roche. And he was made the king of Athens because of his service at the Fourth Crusade. And his service in the Fourth Crusade was at the sack of Constantinople, and it was his job to protect the palace of Blasharni, where the church of My Lady St. Mary Blasharni was, where the shroud was seen by Robert de Clary in 1203. So he's the guy in charge of defending the place where the shroud was kept, and now the shroud's in Athens. And what makes this important is his great-great-granddaughter was named Jean de Vergy, and she married Robert de Clary, who shows the shroud in 1355 in France. So that's about as good as you get that we have. The other thing is that in Byzantine France, if you go to the Othon de la Roche castle, there's a chest there that says this is what the shroud was kept in, what it was brought back to Europe in. So that's the most credible line, probably. There's another theory, though, that the shroud was in the custody of the most powerful group of people in the world at that time, which is the Knights Templar, and that they had custody of it. And what makes this interesting isn't that there's actually no evidence for this whatsoever. It's just kind of like if you thought, all right, well, who's powerful enough to have control of this thing?
Right.
Now, one other factor is the reason why the De La Roches may have kept their possession of it secret or not publicized it at least is because in the year 1215, Pope Innocent III made a proclamation that nobody could sell or display relics without the church's permission. So, if he comes clean and says, I've got the shroud, then it's just going to be taken from him immediately. Right. So you see motive for him to keep it on the down low. Right. Mm-hmm. But if he didn't have it, then, you speculate that this powerful order of warrior monks, the Knights Templar, they would be a really good candidate to think, they would have it. And so that's also been a theory. Like I said, there's no evidence, but there is there are a couple of very interesting make you think things.
Yeah.
Number one of them is when one of the things that makes you think is in 1314 the Knights Templar were outlawed and their leader Jacques de Molay was executed in Paris, and he was executed along with the preceptor of the Templars, whose name was Geoffrey de Charny. But it's 40 years before the shroud shows up in Europe, in Léry, France, and so it's not the same guy, and they're not spelled exactly the same. One's A-Y and one's Y, but there's no standardized spelling at the time, so you can't make a big argument out of that. And the Knights Templar took vows of chastity, so if he was true to it, it wouldn't be his son or grandson, but it may be a cousin or a nephew or something like that. But when the Templars were outlawed, they confessed part of their secret ceremonies was the worship of the image of a bearded head. And nobody really knew what that meant. But in 1951, we learned what that meant, because in Templecombe, England, there was an old building that was used by the Templars, and a storm rolled through the area and rattled the building so hard that some of the ceiling fell in. So you could see the backside of the roof, and there was a panel on the backside of the roof that had this image on it right here, the image of a bearded head, which looks pretty close to the face of the Shroud of Turin.
Yes, it does.
So that's about as good as you get. Like I said, there's no evidence that supports the Templar theory
Yeah.
at all. It falls more on the Othon de la Roche side, but so even with this, with the bearded head and all of that, the Templars could know about it but not have custody of it. So it could be a little bit of a both and in the story.
Wow.
As well. So, okay, so that's the history of where we get it. So 100 years later, the Descharnay family falls on hard times, so they sell it to the king of Savoy. Savoy is an autonomous area that's now part of southern France or northern Italy, and the king puts it in the cathedral at Chambéry, which is now Chambéry, France. And 1532, that's when there's a fire there, and so that's when you see all these triangles across the shroud. Those are patches because those are where holes were, because the shroud was folded up and put in a silver box when it wasn't on display, and the box in the fire got so hot that the corner of it was melting silver onto the corner of the shroud, and because of the way it was folded, it left these 16 holes. So the nuns there put these patches on it, and that's what you see. And they also put a backing cloth on it as well. So from there, about 50 years later, he moved his capital to the other side of the Alps, which is now Turin, Italy, and he put it in the cathedral there, and that's how it becomes known as the Shroud of Turin.
Wow.
So that's the history part. Now you asked about pollen.
I did.
Okay.
Just real quick though, I just want to make an observation that the way the scorch marks happened. I mean, can you imagine if it was moved over just a little bit, a little higher, and you know what I mean? We could not have the face right now.
I know.
It's incredible.
Well, it's been in several fires, and in fact, you can see mineral deposits from the water damage. From putting it out during these fires on several parts of it, not just that 1532 fire, but from a couple others as well. So yeah, and you know what? I'll show you one other thing, but while we're talking about damage on the shroud, that is really fascinating. Is if you look at, you can see these 4 holes that make this L shape that gets mirrored across the shroud. This is from when the shroud was folded up in a different way. It was likely sitting on an altar, and there was an incense censer above it, and some live embers fell and burned all the way through. Just 4 of them happen to be in this L shape, and they burn all the way through, and that's where you get that. So you've got all sorts of damage that gives it these interesting characteristics. Those holes, the burn holes from the incense, I'll show you a super cool piece of evidence here in a minute. So as far as the pollen goes, in 1978, during the investigation at that time, one of the people who did a test. So what happened is the Shroud of Turin research project was given 120 hours to do about 24 tests or so. But really, the first 12 hours were given to the Italian team. And because they're the home court, right? So it was polite. And they ran some tests, but the Italian team invited a Swiss criminologist to do the very first test. His name is Max Frey, and he was at the cutting edge of all the forensic science, CSI stuff. He pioneers this whole field back in the 1940s, and he works all the way into the 80s. And one of the things he came up with was this fascinating idea that he could place suspects at crime scenes using pollen. And the way he would do it was he would just take regular tape, cellophane tape, and press it into the clothes of a suspect and try to pull off pollen that matched the pollen at a crime scene.
Okay.
So in 1973, there was just a preliminary test done on the shroud where a slight piece of cloth was cut away for a couple of tests. And they let him come with his tape and tape some samples off the shroud looking for pollen. So in 1978, the very first thing that happens is they invite Max Fry to come down and take some more samples off. And so this is him with his regular sticky tape. Word on the street, I don't know if it's true, is that he stopped at the drugstore on the way to the cathedral.
I was going to say, it looks so unscientific.
That's exactly what he's got. And look how happy he is to be there.
So, I'd be happy too.
Yeah, he's having a good time. But look at the tension he's putting on the cloth, right? The STURP team is standing there going, what in the world is going on? Because not only is that just regular old tape that's going to leave all this residue on it, but it's putting this tension on the cloth. It's damaging the cloth. So they actually wanted to prevent any of this. So they had the 3M Corporation create proprietary tape that wouldn't leave any residue and had their own special applicator that wouldn't put any tension on the cloth, or at least not enough to do damage. But when the STURP team examined all of their samples that they took with the tape, there was no pollen. And when Max Fry looked at his samples, and he had 38 different samples between the two times he did it, he was able to identify 58 different kinds of pollen. And so this is what the pollen looks like when it's trapped in the weave. And this is what it looks like when you magnify it. So if you had known samples of pollen from different parts of the world, different plants, and you had a whole lot of patience where you could take a comparison microscope and look at what you're looking at in the tape with, the different samples, you'd be able to figure out what you were looking at. And that's what he did. And so he was able to identify 58 different kinds of pollen. And it turns out the pollen comes from the northern part of Italy, the southern part of France, Turkey, the area specifically around Constantinople, Palestine, and the area specifically around Jerusalem. Some of the pollen from Jerusalem was in bloom, which only happens in the springtime. And the majority of the pollen can be found in the area around Jerusalem. So just full disclosure, that's not super specific. Some of it is extremely specific. Some of that pollen that is, found around Jerusalem is just found around the Mediterranean in general. So it doesn't lead you straight there. But when you factor in all the other things, it leads you straight there. It replicates the itinerary that you see in the historical documents. Pretty fascinating.
This map looks like something you would see on a missionary journey of Paul's or something. It's just the way it maps around and stuff. So it really kind of just shows you the route that this took, or at least hypothetical.
Yeah.
But Jerusalem being a point of contact is a huge deal.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
And the time of year.
So then, when people start becoming aware of the Sudarium, one of the first things they do is scientists go, well, where'd this thing came from? So in 1978, they had 79, the year after the shroud examination, Max Fry came down and he did tape samples on the Sudarium. And he pulls off 16, I can't remember how many samples he takes, but he discovers and identifies 16 types of pollen on there. Turns out the pollen is from northern Spain, central Spain, the area around Toledo, northern Africa, probably the area around Alexandria, and Jerusalem. He traces it in a different way. And since then, 25 other species of pollen have been identified on the Sudarium. So the question is, where'd the Sudarium come from? What kind of historical background do you have for the Sudarium?
Yeah.
And there's not nearly as much, partly because nobody knows what to call this thing, right? It's there's all sorts of names for it, face cloth, napkin. And there's just not as much documentary evidence. In the early 11th century, there was a bishop in Oviedo named Pelayo who decided he was going to get to the bottom of it. So he does the digging through the historical documents. And so we know exactly, we have all of these documents, not just his word for it, but he's the researcher who kind of puts the puzzle together. And so the oldest piece of the puzzle we have is from the 6th century, from a travelogue from a pilgrim named Antonius Martyr. He visits the Holy Land, I believe, in 570. And he goes out to the area where John the Baptist had his ministry. And he said that there's a cave there that has 7 nuns, and they are guarding one of the things that it was in their possession that they guarded was the napkin that was around the head of Jesus. And so Paleo does his research, and what he says Antonio's martyr saw was, according to tradition, the disciples of the apostles built a wooden chest, and they put relics in it, and that chest was what was there. And then in the year 614, the Persians show up again, and they lay siege to Jerusalem. And on the way, the Christians move the chest out of the area. So they take it to Alexandria, Egypt. And in 616, or they take it to North Africa, probably Alexandria. In the year 616, the Persians move into northern Africa. So the Christians put the chest on a boat and they send it to Cartagena, Spain, where it was taken by the bishop immediately to Seville. The bishop of Seville takes it there. He has possession of it until he dies 20 years later, and then it was taken to Toledo. Stays in Toledo till the year 711, and this is when the Muslims invade the Iberian Peninsula, and they start to conquer Spain. And so in 711, it gets moved up to the mountains of Asturias, and that becomes the one place that the Muslims never conquer in Spain, one of the only places. And the king of Asturias attributes his success in 761 to defeating the Muslims to the protection offered by the relics in the chest, which includes the Sudarium. So he founds the town of Oviedo, and then he builds the cathedral there, which is that's the cathedral. It's not what he built. What he built looks like that, and it's called the Camera Santa, the Chamber of Sacred Relics. And within there are a bunch of relics, and that's the chest.
That's the actual chest?
That's the actual chest.
Wow.
When it was opened by Paleo and the king in the early 11th century, they inventoried all the relics. They're all still in there except for the Sudarium, which was removed and put in its own reliquary. And then the king had it adorned with all this kind of silver decoration. And what you see behind it is a replica of the Sudarium that covers the window of the reliquary holding the actual Sudarium. And so when you take away the replica, that's the Sudarium in place. It gets exhibited 3 times a year.
But
so
who gets to see it?
Anybody who shows up.
Really?
But it's always the same 3 days. So I believe it's Good Friday, and then there's 2 feast days in September when it is exhibited.
Put that on my calendar.
Yeah. Hey, when I was there last year, nobody seemed to know the thing was there. I mean, I was stood in the sacred chamber, my wife and I, for at least half an hour before somebody else showed up. We had it totally to ourselves.
That's incredible.
It was amazing. Nobody seemed to be, it's a beautiful cathedral, and there's all sorts of things to see, but that's, like, to me, the main draw. And it's popular, but I thought I was going to have to fight the crowds. There's no crowds. There's nothing.
Good to know. We're interested in things that nobody cares about, so we can skip the lines.
You do skip the line. So,
Wow.
so there you go. So you have that's the best historical evidence we have for it, and the pollen seems to follow the same itinerary. And in both cases, the pollen and the historical evidence leads back to Jerusalem.
Do you have a map of both routes put together?
I don't.
Okay. Because visually in my head, I'm seeing both. And it's, I find it interesting because really the only commonality is Jerusalem, right?
That is correct.
So they both went opposite directions. And what the route that you're showing here, this route is also backed up by the pollen that was on it, right?
Yes.
So this isn't just I went through the historical records. This is what I think. It's also backed up with the pollen that we've tested and has been found on it.
Yep. And by the time it leaves Jerusalem or the area around the Jordan, if this is all true, by that time the shroud had been recovered in in Edessa.
Wow, that's incredible. So let's get into what I think is really fascinating, and I think I have it here. It's the radiation hypothesis,
Ah,
because you know, that in my mind, and I understand everybody has their own thresholds of belief and things like that, but for me, it's like it takes the shroud, the story that we read in the Gospels of Christ being crucified, being a man, being crucified, dying on the cross, being buried, and this idea of resurrection. And I feel like it takes that last part of resurrection, and it's like, this might point to that. And I really feel like it's the other piece of a puzzle that could really put people that are more scientifically minded to be like, that's a really interesting thought process to go down.
yeah. So regarding the hypothesis you're talking about, the way this comes about is the STURP team in 1978 was headed up by a physicist from the Air Force Academy named John Jackson. And just to be so you know, the STURP team gets mischaracterized by skeptics as a group of scientists made up of evangelical Christians who believed this was real and went over looking for evidence to back up what they already believed, as if, it was some sort of confirmation bias project. And that's not the case at all. Okay. There were 33 scientists. The majority identified as Christians. Some were Catholic, some were Protestant, some were liberal Protestants, some were evangelical. They didn't all believe that the shroud was authentic. And then there were guys on the team who were atheists, and there were Jews. So there was no uniformity as to whether this thing was authentic or not. What unites the team, what they had in common, is that they all were experts in their field. They all had PhDs or the equivalent terminal degree in their area of expertise as scientists, and they all worked at highly credible institutions like Jet Propulsion Laboratories and Caltech and Los Alamos National Lab, Sandia National Labs, the Air Force Academy, Air Force Weapons Lab. These were serious scientists who worked at highly reputable institutions, and they were just interested in what you could know. So this goes to the point that this is more than a relic now. This is an object of scientific inquiry, regardless of what your religious beliefs are. And so they had two dozen tests or so, and they got permission to go do it. And so at the end of it, they end up with results that it took like 3 or 4 years to publish them in over 20 different peer-reviewed scientific journals. This wasn't a pop culture type of thing. They didn't go to Christianity Today or, USA Today or any kind of, news magazines or anything like that. And I'm not putting those things down, but that's not how you report your scientific data. Right. They reported it as within the bounds of academia, that this was their world. They were scientists reporting scientific findings so that other scientists, their peers, could review it. And all of their tests affirmed, didn't prove, it was all consistent with the authenticity of the shroud. And they determined that it was not made by any known artistic or natural process. So the question is, well, what made it then? So John Jackson, he's still alive. He has remained a shroud researcher this entire time. And so he has a really interesting spreadsheet where he takes about a dozen or 15 so features of the shroud that you need to account for by any theory that you have for how the shroud was made. So if you think the shroud was faked, then whatever process that you are going to propose has to account for these features. And there is no proposed theory, artistic or otherwise that can account for all the features of the shroud. And it turns out you can make a replica of the shroud. You can make something that looks identical to the shroud that doesn't have the features of the actual shroud. This is identical to the actual shroud, and it doesn't share the features. Because by the time you print that image onto the cloth, it's absorbed into the cloth, for example. It's not just on the outermost 0.2 microns of the thread. It's made in an entirely different way, right? So there's things like that it doesn't account for, even though it's an exact replica. So as a physicist, he thought, all right, what do you got to do to make an image with these properties on it? What, as a physicist, is required? And chemically, what's required? And so he came up with a theory called the fall-through radiation hypothesis. And the idea is this. So I have an image here of the sculpture that's been made based on the shroud. You can see the body's in rigor mortis. It's hunched forward and the knees are bent. And then that's roughly how the shroud wraps around the body. So in the fall-through radiation hypothesis, the idea is that radiation emits from the body at the vacuum ultraviolet wavelength in a burst as it dematerializes, which allows the cloth to fall through it. Okay, so a burst of radiation comes from the body at that specific wavelength as it dematerializes, which lets the cloth fall through it. That would imprint the cloth with the image as the way we see it. And yet you can't, it doesn't happen in nature. You can't replicate it. You can't test it in a lab. You can't go out and observe it. That's just the best we got. The closest that we have to being able to replicate it is scientists, physicists recently have been able to use a laser at vacuum ultraviolet in a very incredibly short burst, like millisecond, short burst at that range that left a superficial imprint on the cloth on both sides, but not the middle. And that's about as good as we got. It doesn't mean that's how it happened. It means that's as close as anybody's ever gotten to replicating.
And is this considered the same thing as I think it was called the light burst theory or something?
Yeah.
Right. So it's the same thing that we're talking about.
So
here.
There is so
I feel like the light burst theory is like the elementary way of describing this.
It is the elementary way, and that's not saying anything,
No, it's
not
fine.
putting
Yeah,
you down, but that's like how it gets popularized.
Right.
So then you end up kind of quantifying the light, and it sounds like this. It is the light burst is what that is. It means that it's a very, very extremely short pulse of this particular wavelength of radiation.
Oh.
That's the light burst.
So is this this theory based on the idea that when they came and they saw that he wasn't in the tomb, the body was gone, and that this is how it was printed onto the cloth then? Or was this like resurrection, a resurrection process, I suppose? I don't even know how to describe this.
Okay. As far as the scientific evidence goes, this is where the period is put.
Right.
Okay. So at this point, though, because of all the stuff that we know, and to be clear, we have a theology where we embrace the resurrection. So we have we've got a way to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So we see kind of this next step, like, okay, this sounds like maybe it's like natural residue from the miracle of the resurrection.
Yeah.
I believe that. Okay. I could be wrong, and that's fine. Doesn't change the reality of the resurrection if I'm wrong. That's what I think we're looking at. You just can't get there scientifically. You can just go all the way up to the wall and look over.
That's where I close the door on scientific. I'm like, I'll take it here. I'll take it from here, guys.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it would be if the resurrection is a real historical actual event, and I believe it was, then this might be the kind of thing that is the natural artifact created by it.
And this is, I mean, maybe from your understanding, the best possible theory as to how that was made?
It's not even a theory. It's a hypothesis.
Hypothesis.
You can't even test this. They're just like, okay, this is about the best we got.
But that's the best we got.
That's the best we got. It doesn't mean that's the best we'll ever have. But that's the best we have right now.
That's incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So I also want to, this is a little bit of backtracking, but I feel like we hinted on it. I don't want to skip over it either.
Okay.
The dating of this.
The radiocarbon dating.
Right. And so that's something that was relied on by skeptics. And what is there a new form of dating that we've come out with now, or we started implementing that has redated the shroud? Because I from what I understand, the skeptics had said that we carbon-14 dated the shroud, and I think it was 600 or 700 years old. They had been saying, and is there a new form of dating, or how does this all work?
The answer is there is a new dating method. But before I tell you about it,
okay,
we got to work through the radiocarbon dating method, because I mean that sounds like that's just going to settle how old the cloth is.
Sure.
And so the radiocarbon dating of the shroud happened because the STRP team was so successful. Everybody was like fascinated by all the data. It doesn't conclusively show it's authentic, but there was no the data was all consistent with it being authentic. There was no outliers saying like, yeah, it looks like this thing could be faked up or whatever. There was nothing. And so the STRP team proposed another round of tests, and one of them was radiocarbon dating. So to answer the question, how old is the cloth?
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed like such an important thing to answer. It got separated out as its own thing to deal with. And the other test ended up not getting done for various reasons. The STRP team ended up breaking up. And so you had guys from the STRP team who were still involved in the radiocarbon dating. And so in the mid-'80s, there was a group of people who were advising on how to go about this. And so it was a couple guys from the STRP team. There was the scientific advisor to the Vatican. There was the Archbishop of Turin, who is he's the custodian of the shroud. So just a little bit about the shroud. Remember, it was the King of Savoy is who owned the shroud. And he owned the shroud up until the year 1983. That's when the last hereditary King of Savoy died. So he bequeathed it to whoever the sitting pope is. So the sitting pope owns the shroud. So when the 1978 test is done, it's done with the permission of the King of Savoy. Now, in the mid-'80s, now that it belongs to the Pope, the church has far more of a say in it. So the Pope owns it, but really kind of the caretaker of it is the Archbishop of Turin. So they all get together and they talk about how they're going to go about it. It's non-binding kind of protocol that they come up with, but they do come up with a protocol. So the idea is that they're going to take 7 different samples from at least 3 different locations to give to 7 different labs who used one of 2 different kinds of radiocarbon dating. And that would give a big enough data set that you could reliably give a date range. So that's the idea. And then before the sample was cut in 1988, there were rumors that went out that the scientists caught wind of that the Archbishop wasn't going to adhere to these decisions, to the protocol they came up with. And so they warned him that, there's letters to him that said that, if you use fewer samples or fewer labs or whatever, it's a hit to the integrity and it's not going to be as trustworthy as a result. When the time came to cut the sample, he in fact changed everything. And instead of 7 different samples, he allowed 1 sample to be cut. And that sample was given to 3 different labs who used all the same radiocarbon dating technique to do the work. So almost everything about it was changed. He never explained why. He didn't have to. And I'm not trying to vilify him because, if you think about if you were the person in charge of the Shroud of Turin,
yeah,
and And you're kind of like, yeah, that'd be great to figure out, how old it was. And in theory, let's cut a sample and figure it out. And then the time came to actually do it. Okay. It's like saying, okay, Tony, we're going to cut off part of your body. And so we can do some tests on you. What part do you want cut off?
Yeah.
And they're thinking, maybe the scientists are going to, and it'd be really helpful if we cut your eye, that'd be the most helpful, or a piece of your brain. And you totally back out of it and go, no, you can have like the knuckle off my pinky toe, and that's what he did, because they also said, he didn't just change all those rules. They also advised him not to take the sample from a couple different spots on the shroud because they showed a high likelihood of contamination. And when the time came to cut the sample, that's where he allowed it to be cut. That's the only place. And so that spot is the upper left-hand corner. Now, this replica is a photograph taken in 1978. This is the STURP team photo. So that is what got tested. You're looking at a photo of what got tested in that upper left-hand corner there before it was cut. So on the screen, I've got the area right here. Okay, that's what gets cut. Now you can see this is where the backing path cloth is, because some stuff has already been cut away. Dignitaries used to come visit the shroud, and they would cut little pieces off and give it to them. So this is already chopped away. This is dirty backing cloth. This is cleaner backing cloth because this little fin shape was cut away in 1973. That becomes important in a minute. This is the strip that gets cut for the test in 1978. And so this is the cut being made. So when the cut gets made, what happens is the person supervising it is the head of the Italian team from 1978. His name's Giovanni Rigi. So what they do when they do the cut is, the first thing is this gets cut in half, and Rigi gets to keep this part, and he puts it in his safe back in Italy. And then this part gets cut into 3 equal weights, and that's what's distributed to the 3 different labs. And so they each do their tests on it. And 6 months later, they make an announcement at a press conference that the date is between 1260 and 1380. So it's, this gets popularized in the press as it's a medieval fake. The STURP team's scientists were all shocked because this is an outlier. You've got over 24 tests that indicate authenticity, and you've got one outlier test that says not authentic. For whatever reason, this test takes on more weight than all the other 24 tests or so. And so the possibility that this could be medieval scares off a lot of the scientists who were doing this research, and they're not interested in the shroud anymore because it's a fake. So, who cares what it is? Cool image, we just don't care anymore. So a lot of the scientists just drop out. The church then disallows any more scientific investigation on the cloth, and they focus on its conservation. So at this, shortly after this, about the year 2000, they end up with the high-tech reliquary that it is in now, which is, fireproof, atmosphere-proof, and light, protects it from light and all of that. So that's what they're really focused on. But the STURP team type of investigation has never been allowed since then. So this just kind of gets locked away. But there were some scientists who were like, something's not right about this, because everything seems to be indicating authenticity. And then you got this one thing that doesn't really make sense. So there were a couple of researchers who hung in there and kept doing some more work. And there was a husband and wife team in the late 90s, early 2000s, that got a hold of a high-resolution photograph of one of the samples given to one of the labs that was dated. And they showed this image to several different textile experts, didn't tell them what it was, and didn't tell them they were showing it to other experts. And they all came back and said, well, it looks like, an ancient piece of cloth that's been patched. there's something else. It's mixed together. And one of them even said that this is a technique known in the Middle Ages called an invisible reweave. And so they proposed this theory that the nuns probably at the time they put the patches and the backing cloth on the shroud, fortified a weak part of the shroud and introduced cotton in an invisible reweave to support that part of the shroud. And so the chemist on the STIRP team, a guy named Raymond Rogers, whose career was spent at Los Alamos National Labs, where like Oppenheimer takes place, he hears this report and he does not buy it. He does not think, he knows that the shroud is linen. He's handled the shroud. He actually has threads taken from the main body of the shroud in his lab. He knows they're linen. So he thinks this is kind of a crazy idea, or at least he doesn't buy into it. But he decides to demonstrably prove this is false. So the way he does it is he also has threads from the 1973 sample, this spot right here, okay, taken adjacent to the area cut in 1978. So this, what was cut right here, he's got threads from that in his office. And so he does a chemical analysis of the thread he has from the middle of the cloth from 1978, and it's just linen. This is exactly what he thought. And linen comes from the flax plant. Then he goes and looks at the 1973 thread, and he's shocked because it's cotton from the cotton plant woven into linen in this incredibly hard to detect integration of one cloth into the other. And the cotton has been coated in plant gum, probably to make it look like the linen. So it's a mixture. And not only is that it's a shock because the main body of the cloth is linen, but it doesn't make sense in terms of Jewish tradition, which forbids the mixing of these two cloths together, right? So it's not even Jewish at this point. It's not part of a Jewish tradition to have these two materials mixed together. So this is totally shocking to him. So he thinks, well, what did they test in 1978? So he reaches out to Giovanni Rigi, the guy who's got half of the sample still in his safe. And Rigi sends him threads from what got cut as the sample, and he does the test, and it's a mixture of cotton woven into linen, coated in plant gum.
Wow.
And so he published his result in early 2005 in a peer-reviewed scientific journal for chemists. And he conclusively demonstrates that what got tested in 1988 to get this radiocarbon date is not representative of the shroud. But it's only in this academic, this journal for chemists who read it. So it's not, hardly anybody knows about it. But, he doesn't prove the shroud is from the 1st century. And he doesn't say the scientists did anything wrong. He doesn't impugn them at all. There are people who, some people when the 1988 date came out, they start attacking the scientists. Oh, well, you just have a conspiracy of a bunch of atheists who don't want this thing to, verify Jesus or whatever. And you don't have to go there. Right. Okay. That's, and there are some people who say, well, maybe the fires that have been in it have skewed the data because the change, in the chemical composition of the thread. And that might be true too. We just don't have any data to support that. That's just kind of speculation. You don't have to do any of that. Because of Raymond Rogers' work, what you find is that the radiocarbon date does not represent cloth that is representative of the main body of the shroud. So the answer is, with the radiocarbon date, it doesn't represent the main body of the shroud, and therefore no one knows how old the cloth is. We have no scientific evidence for how old the cloth is. And then you asked about a new method.
Yeah.
And this comes from 2022. So a couple of years ago, there was a new test that was done using something called wax-S method, which is a wide-angle X-ray scattering technique. which is, okay, so just to be clear, I am not a scientist.
Mhm.
My dad is a physicist. So when this report came out, I called my dad. I'm like, okay,
Speed dial.
tell me, does this make any sense whatsoever? And so, so my knowledge, I'm just reporting. Okay. So can't quiz me too hard on this. My understanding is wax S is not a new technique at all. It's a known, trusted method, but it hasn't ever been used to date textiles before. This is the innovation. And so the way it gets reported in the pop press is that there's a new date done on the shroud that proves it's from the 1st century with a new way of dating. And this is not what happened. Okay, what happened is with the wax S dating, it's not actually dating. What the wax S does is it when it's performed on linen, it gives a measurement for the degradation of the cellulose in the linen thread. All it does is give you a measurement, doesn't tell you a date. So to get a date, what you have to do is have a sample of a known age that you also do it to, and then you compare it. So what the test did is it performed this on a thread from the shroud. They had a linen sample from the 2000s, a linen sample from the Middle Ages, a linen sample from the 1st century from around the year 550 to 74 AD, found at Masada, and then I believe a 3000 BC Egyptian burial cloth. So they ran the wax S on all of it. And the 1st century cloth from Masada was almost a dead match for the degradation value that they had come up with. And therefore, it is consistent with the 1st century cloth. So that's what that is. What's not fully appreciated here, and that's fascinating. And it's, I love that they did that.
Yeah.
What's not fully appreciated is that apparently the environment affects the degradation of that they're measuring, and that unless you know the known environment for the entire time of its existence, then it's not nearly as apples to apples as it sounds like, because you don't know where the shroud has been. You don't know where the 1st century burial shroud of Masada has been. You don't know where the medieval cloth has been. You probably only really have provenance for the cloth from the 2000s. So that's kind of the asterisk on this that also needs to be appreciated. Doesn't mean it's not worth anything. It just means that that's one of the things that has to be considered. Also, because it's an innovative use of this technology to date like this, you just got to let it have time to be vetted by the scientific community and see if it's accepted or not as well. So fascinating, but we don't want to put too much weight on it.
Yeah. So if I have this straight, original dating from 78, I believe, or was it 88? 88 is flawed dating because of...
It's not flawed dating, it's flawed sample.
Right, okay, so it's a flawed sample.
We have let's just believe everything about the scientists. They did it with integrity.
Sure.
And not impugning any of their work. Zero.
They
just tested what they had. Okay.
Gotcha.
What they had was a contaminated sample. It's not representative of the shroud. That's the best way to put it.
Okay. So that initial dating, which people, maybe if they don't know, we're still relying on, hey, this has been debunked because you said that it was published in a journal, but nobody read the journal. So nobody even knew that it's been reanalyzed. And so this in 3 years ago, we have this new methodology that shows promise, but there is flawed aspects of it as well, because we don't know the historical route that this thing has taken over thousands of years.
Right.
So to this day, I guess what I'd like to do is maybe bring it in for a landing with this line of thinking for you to maybe ponder on. Do you know of anything that is on the horizon that might be able to lead towards a very accurate dating that we would say that the shroud is 2,000 years old? Or are we still kind of at a point in time where we're still playing with dating and just seeing, what's going to come up? Because we don't know what's going to happen and develop in the scientific realm in the future.
Right.
So are we still kind of, I guess, in a waiting game as to the actual accurate dating of the shroud?
Yeah. Now, you're asking somebody who's got a degree in theology and art.
Right. Okay.
So I can't tell you what's on the scientific horizon. But we see the type of advances that occur in science very quickly. So I'm very optimistic that other methods will be developed, and maybe even this one, the wax S, will be refined, and there's ways to get through the asterisk, that's that we have there right now. And to be fair, the scientists who do that test don't say, well, this proves it's first century. All they, it's consistent with the first century cloth. It's the way it gets reported that gets overstated. And that's kind of the what we're trying to fight through to get to the real data here, the way we're talking about it.
Yeah.
But there is one other fascinating line of evidence for the authenticity of the shroud that's totally different than anything we've talked about.
Oh,
Can we do that before
absolutely.
we land?
Absolutely.
Okay, because this has to do with art history. And the idea behind this comes from something that a researcher, shroud researcher in the 1930s recognized. And he saw that among the images of Jesus, particularly Byzantine icons starting around the middle of the 6th century, they all have this uniformity to it. In fact, a very high percentage of them have the same 15 features or so. And yet, before the middle of the 6th century, there's this wide variety of ways to depict Jesus that doesn't have any of this. And he started trying to figure out what the best way to explain this was. So to fully appreciate it, you need to get a sense of what Jesus looked like in the earliest days of Christianity. So here is just kind of a representative sample going from the very earliest image of the crucifixion, which is that graffiti, but it gives Jesus a horse head, so that doesn't really count. But that's the earliest thing we got. But
with that graffiti, though, what I feel like I've seen this before, where that graffiti was meant to actually be insulting to the Christians, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. They were making.
That's why it had a horse head.
That's right.
Yeah.
They were making fun of this, like, our buddy's God. This is who he's worshiping, and that's what they draw. So, but that's the earliest actual depiction of Jesus, although it's meant to mock him because of the horse head. But the other images range from 2nd century to the early 5th century, and you can see he's got long hair, he's got short hair, he's bearded, he's clean shaven, he's enthroned, he's a wonder worker, a shepherd, a fisherman. It's all sorts of different ways. Augustine even complains in writing about how many depictions of Jesus there are. And then suddenly, in the middle of the 6th century, this is what happens, where Jesus looks like Barry Gibb, like across the board. Barry Gibb is one of the Bee Gees, by the way. I'm talking like a dad rock guy. So there are features that are common in almost every one of these icons, and this is again just representative. This isn't all the data we have. So there's like this weird kind of triangle between the eyebrows. There's a line across the forehead, and all of them. He's got these big, heavy, owlish eyes. He's got the same shape and size nose. His hair is parted in the middle, and it's usually got strands hanging down like that. He's got a forked beard in most of them. The way the tunic hits across the chest is in all of them. And so the guy was like, okay, how do you explain that? What happened in the middle of the 6th century that would all of a sudden make these writers of the Byzantine icons believe that there was all of a sudden it's like there's an exemplar they're all trying to match. Yeah. So what happened? And in the year 544 was the recovery of the image of Edessa. And that image has all of the features that are being replicated in all the other images. And so this became this area of interest for art historians to dive into. In the late 70s and early 80s, there was a psychiatrist at Duke University who went way down this rabbit hole. So he started comparing images of the face on the cloth to these different Byzantine icons. And a couple of Byzantine icons become very important, especially this one, because this is called a Pantocrator icon. It's from St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of the traditional Mount Sinai in Egypt. And the monks there believe it was painted with the exemplar of the burial shroud of Jesus. And it's dated to the year 550, around 550, 6 years after the recovery of the image of Edessa. So what this guy would do, this guy from Duke, is before there was, he didn't have a Mac to work on at this point. So what he had was 2 slide projectors, and each one of these images in the slide projectors, he'd project them onto his wall at the same time, and he had 2 polarized lenses. One was horizontal, one was vertical, and then he held a third polarizing lens, and he would twist it, and he would be able to identify places where these 2 images, when they're overlaid, match identically, and he counts about 175 of them, or 170 of them.
I mean, just looking at it, the nose is incredibly similar.
The nose is incredibly similar. And yet, at the same time, when they're side by side, you kind of go, all right, long-haired guy, real similar nose. He's bearded, but really 170 points. And to be fair, I have never seen a map showing all 170 points. Never. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just have never seen one, if it does exist. But you don't really need that, because I'm going to do an overlay using Photoshop filters, and you can see just what he's getting at, because you don't have to count the points once you see it. So if you stare at the tip of the nose here, you will see the eyes just kind of open up, and the eyebrows fill in. The nose, as you pointed out, is an exact match. The beard matches. This weird stain under here becomes the top of the tunic, and then the hair parts, everything. So just look at the tip of the nose. Ready?
Oh, wow!
All right.
Whoa!
Here it comes again.
Unreal.
So here's another version of it. So slightly lighter version of the shroud and a different overlay. It's exact. It's crazy.
That's incredible.
And so here's yet another version. So this is a naked eye version of the shroud, but with the contrast amped up, and the flesh just fits right on top of it. Is that not amazing?
That's wild.
So this Pantocrator icon image is the closest image we have in existence to the face on the shroud. So a couple years ago, it kind of became a thing for people to try to use AI to create take the data from the face on the shroud to see what he looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So as a graphic designer, I use this program as well, but I know that you can't just put in the data from the face on the shroud and extrapolate a face out of it with any kind of realism. What you need is an example image, and to also feed it as an example. So the images that you see, there's very powerful and very realistic, but they're also based on another image. So it's like they find an image of a long-haired guy that they think basically looks the same, and they include that in the data. So when I did it, this is the data that I used. These 2 images, because this is the closest we have. Okay. So when the data from these 2 images are combined in Midjourney, this is the image I came up with.
Wow.
So whether that's realistic or not, we don't know. Plausible if the Pantocrator icon is really reflecting the way that Jesus looked, and the face on the shroud is actually Jesus. right? All sorts of caveats,
Yeah.
but it's a pretty compelling image.
It's absolutely compelling. So I mean, we've gone from ancient times to 70s and 80s to now we're in 2025 using AI to pull the image and data from this ancient relic. I mean, if this is accurate, I mean, accurate, I use that loosely, but I mean, with AI, we could be looking at the face of Christ.
It's way more compelling than the images I grew up with in the 70s where Jesus looks like he just walked off stage with Kenny Loggins, you know, he's like in a shampoo commercial and all that. It's totally different. So he also did it with this image. This is a coin from the year 695 or so, and it's the first time Jesus appears on a coin.
That's a depiction of Christ on a coin?
Yes.
Wow.
And in fact, I was just in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago, and at the Archaeological Museum, they've got 3 of these coins on display. So you can see it. They're tiny. They're about the size of a dime at the most. So this is zoomed in quite a bit. But he did this same overlay technique and found 140 places where it matched. And so when you do this match, watch the nose. It overlays exactly again.
That's wild. That's incredible.
And then I'll show you one more piece of art history evidence. And this has to do with a book called the Hungarian Prey Codex. And this, or Hungarian Prey manuscript, it's dated from around the year 1195. That's 65 years earlier than the oldest end of the radiocarbon dating date, okay, which is 1260. So it's 1260 to 1380 is the radiocarbon dating. This is from 1195. And it shows, this top panel is an image of the burial of Jesus. Look at the position of the body. His right arm's over the left. So it's the same position as the man in the shroud. But what's fascinating, let me flip this over, is this pattern on the cloth is really unusual. But this pattern is the same as the weave of the shroud, which is called a 3/1 herringbone pattern. So this distinct weave in the shroud is actually depicted in this cloth. But even weirder than that, look at the detail that is included. These 4 circles in the L shape, which match the poker holes right there, which would be a really weird detail to include on a burial shroud that doesn't exist yet, according to the radiocarbon dating.
Wow.
Not only that, but look at this extra cloth there. What in the world is that? Might be the Sudarium.
Wow.
It's the other cloth. Whether the people who made that image for the Hungarian Prey manuscript knew about the Sudarium or not, it looks like they're depicting the other cloth found in the tomb.
Wow. So that seals it for me.
Yeah,
that seals it for me. That's
my
incredible.
work is done here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just cracked the case. I mean, I'm so glad you shared that here, because that really, I mean, especially you pointed out, I don't know how long we've been going, but at least an hour ago, you pointed out the L shape, and to bring that full circle, really, and just so I understand, this artistic piece predates the radiocarbon dating.
By 65 years.
By 65 years. Incredible. Wow. Well, Mr. Doug Powell, I appreciate you joining me and letting me come out here and do this conversation with you in front of all these replicas. I mean, this has been absolutely fascinating for me.
Well, thanks. Can I land the plane?
Please.
All right.
Yes.
I want to reiterate that the authenticity of these 2 things does not, it's not what the faith is based on.
Right.
That the truthfulness of Christianity does not rely on whether these 2 things are authentic. They could be proven to be false, and nothing would happen to the truth claims of Christianity, or my faith or my theology. But if they are authentic and you've seen the evidence, then this is the modest case that I'm making. It's very compelling. It's very compelling that these things are actually artifacts that we read about in John 20. And as a result, they become corroborations that these are real historical accounts, that this really happened. But even more importantly, I mean, and it gives additional information, which is also important. But the most important thing is that as Christians, we believe that Jesus shed his blood for the forgiveness of our sins. And we hear that so often, it's a precious truth to us. It's central to our faith. But we hear it so much, it becomes abstract or spiritualized, and it loses its kind of concreteness, its historicity to us. But think about it. If these things really are authentic, then the blood that was shed for the forgiveness of your sins, that's it right there. That's what you're looking at. That's the blood of the covenant that was shed for the forgiveness of many. That's what makes these things important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't have said it any better. I appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
All right, Tony, there's one more thing that I've got to have you do here.
Okay.
And you're going to need your phone to do it.
Got it right here.
So open up your settings and go to accessibility.
Okay.
And display and text size.
Okay.
And then scroll down to find classic invert.
Okay.
Turn that on. And then close the settings and go to your camera.
Okay. Oh boy.
You got it?
Yeah.
All right. Turn around and check out the face of the shroud.
I gotta get up for this. Whoa. I'll take a picture of this.
Go as close as you want.
That is incredible.
And you look at the hands over here.
It's like, wow. It's like an X-ray machine on my phone.
Right. So this is what Secunda Pia, the guy who took the first photograph, experienced.
Wow. Let me take a video of this. That is incredible. Whoa.
And that's something that anybody watching this at home can do too. You even just on a computer screen get a picture of the shroud, and you can flip your phone around and do this.
That's incredible. I can't believe that.